episode 36 of our weekly CRICKETher Vodcast. Now, the WBBL is reaching its final stages, and to celebrate, we are this week in the WBBL village, joining the players there. So Sid, where were we going into the final group stage matches at the start of the weekend?
Well, actually, last weekend I said that the Renegades and the Hurricanes were already out of it, and in fact that wasn't true. I did mention that I hadn't actually looked at all the potential permutations, and when you did, there was actually a path going into the final weekend where even the Renegades and the Hurricanes could both have qualified. That obviously would have been the result of a lot of games going in a particular direction. That didn't happen for either of them, but on the first day of the weekend, the Heat got through to the finals. And the Stars had already confirmed their place, and they were by the weekend they were already definitely going to kind of be the first team through from the league. But we still had three teams that could theoretically have made it through: the Thunder, the Scorchers, and the Sydney Sixers going into the final day. The Sydney Sixers needed stuff to really go their way, though. They needed to overturn a huge difference in net run rate. So even though the Scorchers lost, and the Sixers won, and Elise Perry hit a huge century of 100 and something off 48 balls or something. But it still wasn't
111 off 52.
Still wasn't quite enough for the Sixers. So the Thunder and the Scorchers are joining the Heat and the Stars in the semi-finals. So the first semi-final will be the Stars versus the Scorchers.
Yes, because the Scorchers didn't manage to win their match, so they finished in fourth place. So it's first v fourth, isn't it? And then second v third, which will be Heat v the Thunder.
Yep. So we'll be looking forward to those semi-finals and the final next week, Raf.
Absolutely, we will. Yeah. So the way I understand it is that Elise Perry knew going in to open the batting that she couldn't win the game for her side because the Stars had already made 178 in that match. And so, therefore, to try and overturn their net run rate deficit would have been basically impossible at that point.
Yeah, they were at the point where they would have needed to get it in 5 overs or something. And
so I actually think that's even more impressive for her to go out and bat like that because she knew it was in vain, and there are quite a lot of players who just would have just shrugged and gone, okay, well, fine, and not batted with the kind of impetus that she did, but she's just that kind of player, never say die attitude, and I think that's really impressive, and I admire her for that, despite having written a piece describing her as a pantomime villain a couple of years ago, but we'll overlook that for now. So now the big surprise in that sense then is that the Sixers, who have traditionally been very successful in the WBBL, haven't qualified for a second consecutive year, and there were lots of people talking them up, including us. I think that we both said we were expecting the Sixers to get through to the semi-finals. So what's gone wrong for them, Sid?
Well, I feel it was all kind of summed up by something that happened in one of the games over the weekend where Elise Perry and Dana van Niekerk both went for a catch. It was a high ball. Elise Perry basically got it, and then Dana van Niekerk ran into her and knocked it out of her hands. And that kind of confusion just felt summed up for me, the fact that the Sixers really haven't clicked this season, have they, Raf?
Yeah, no, it was really awful to watch. You just sort of head in your hands going, how on earth has that happened? That two international players have not called for the ball. And the fact that Perry had it in her hands and then it knocked out. I think it's been an interesting season for the Sixers, and I think that while this is a bit controversial, I'm going to be slightly critical of Elise Perry. I think that she hasn't met her own high standards, particularly with the ball. She hasn't bowled in very many of the games, but the ones that she has bowled in, I think she's only taken 8 wickets and her economy rate's been quite high, over 8. And so in terms of where she ranks in the WBBL bowling this season, she's going to be probably coming in quite low down the list. And, you know, I do think that the Sixers rely on her both with bat and ball. So that's been difficult. Potentially she's struggling a bit with coming back from her injury. What was it that she'd injured again, Sid?
She injured her hamstring, Raf.
I think you mean her hamstring.
No, it's the hamstring. It's the little bit of string that holds your hand together. I'm sure it is.
So that would be quite important for bowlers then. Okay, so yeah.
Do write in and tell us if we're wrong, but I'm not usually wrong about these things.
So potentially, therefore, that's gonna be affecting her bowling as an ongoing issue. So there's a bit of a concern there, both for the Sixers and potentially for Australia going forward, because she's been opening their bowling of late, hasn't she?
Yeah, it was mentioned on comms that she's actually changed her action again. It seems to have been changed a couple of times over the last few years as she's responded to injury concerns. And she's really obviously trying very hard not to put too much pressure on her hamstring during the follow-through. But that means that she's just, she's obviously not completely comfortable, therefore, going through with the action as she's trying to limit the follow-through to protect the hamstring. So, she's obviously struggling. But, I mean, we should state it's, as you say, by her very high standards. She obviously still remains one of the best players in the world, but she's not looking quite the player that she would be if she was completely, on top physically.
Okay. Now, something else that's gone wrong for the Sixers this weekend happened again in that match against the Renegades. It's been described as an administrative error. So basically, they had a squad of 15 players, and they'd substituted Hayley Silverholmes, hadn't they? And then they wanted her to be playing again, and they'd named her on their team sheet. And they actually got to the halfway stage of the match, and they batted. Unfortunately, Hayley Silverholmes hadn't batted because they hadn't lost enough wickets for her to have to come in, and they suddenly realised, or somebody suddenly realised, that she wasn't actually back in their squad officially because she hadn't been approved to come back into the squad from her replacement. So the Sixers had to sort of go to the Renegades cap in hand and say, sorry guys, we've made a bit of an error here. Do you mind if we field a substitute fielder? Unfortunately, Renegades said, that's fine, we don't mind. And so they had a substitute fielder, and that meant that they were a bowler short and ultimately lost that game. It was quite exciting at the end there. So that was a bit crap for the Sixers, but we understand that also there's been a bit of a punishment come through, hasn't there, Sid?
Yeah, well, this is just bizarre, frankly. That Cricket Australia have fined them $25,000. But ultimately, the Sydney Sixers organisation is owned by Cricket Australia. Yeah. So Cricket Australia have fined themselves because that's where it's not going to come from, anything except from Cricket Australia themselves. So Cricket Australia have basically put on their 5 nines and kicked themselves very hard in the whatsits. I mean, is this some kind of bizarre tax dodge? I don't know, but it's really odd and
Yeah, it is a bit strange, isn't it? I guess, yeah. So that probably messed things up a bit for the Sixers as well in terms of their actual potential qualifying for the final, for the finals. Yes.
Hard times to be a Sixer, Raf.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's all for the WBBL this week. Obviously, there'll be much more WBBL chat next week. And we're looking forward to those semi-finals and finals. Now, more news coming through this week about the Commonwealth Games, which we talked about on the Vodcast a couple of weeks ago. And they've now at last confirmed how the qualification is going to work. Now, it's so complicated that I need a computer to read it out. But essentially what we've got is, we knew that there were going to be 8 teams.
Okay.
And they've said that England are going to automatically qualify by virtue of being hosts, which I think makes sense. I mean, obviously England would have qualified anyway. But, let's dot the I's and cross the T's there and make sure the hosts aren't excluded, because that would wind up being bad in terms of like fan access and things like that. So that's one spot taken care of. There'll be 6 more spots decided by the rankings, and then there'll be 1 spot for a qualifying tournament, which gives some hope to people like Scotland and some of the other nations that might be hoping to get there as a one-off. But there's still a massive oddity, isn't there, Raf, about the way that things are going to work with the West Indies, because there was a circle to be squared there, and they've kind of squared that circle with by taking a blunt instrument to it, and it's still not very pretty, is it?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different scenarios for the West Indies. So the first is that they automatically qualify by virtue of being ranked as one of the top 6 alongside England as the automatic qualification, or West Indies might then have to play in the qualifying tournament if they don't automatically qualify, and they will play as West Indies. Now, in either of those scenarios, what you've actually got transpiring is very, very strange indeed. because it's West Indies that either qualify, if they qualify automatically by virtue of being one of the best teams in the world, it's not West Indies that then go on and represent West Indies in the Commonwealth Games. They then have to have their own little inter-island tournament and decide amongst themselves which one island is going to represent them in the Commonwealth Games. So that's one option. The alternative is actually worse, which is that they don't qualify automatically. They join the qualifying tournament, they play in the qualifying tournament as West Indies, and then, assuming that they win the qualifying tournament,
Which you'd think they would.
Which you'd think that they would. They then go on and pick one island again to represent them. So basically, if I was Scotland, I'd be really cross. Because you'd think that Scotland actually have a good chance of beating...
You don't want to make the Scots cross. Remember the Battle of Culloden, Raf.
Okay, I don't know if we should be mentioning that, given that we're English. Google it, guys. It's a difficult situation. Anyway, yeah, so if you're Scotland, you probably think that you've got a decent chance of qualifying if you're playing against, say, Trinidad or Jamaica. You don't think you've got a good chance of qualifying if you're playing against West Indies. And it's not really, it just doesn't make sense that West Indies qualify as a collective and then go on and represent one island.
The team that qualifies is not the team that's actually going to play.
It's absolutely bizarre. And I think that what's happened is that there's been some kind of politics going on, basically, and the ICC and the Commonwealth Games Federation have decided, well, we have to get Cricket West Indies on board with whatever we decide, and this is the way to do it. So it's a bit of a kind of half-assed solution that doesn't really make much sense at all. So that's what we've ended up with. Yes, yeah, exactly. Like lots of things in cricket, we've ended up with a half-assed solution that pleases nobody. So that's what's happening.
Okay.
And we've had another big bit of news, and that actually relates to what's happening in English summer 2021, so a year ahead of the Commonwealth Games, which is that England are going to be playing South Africa and New Zealand.
Yeah, we're going to be seeing a lot of New Zealand, aren't we? Where the England team are travelling to New Zealand for, I can't believe it's not the World Cup, in February, which is when the World Cup was obviously supposed to be. New Zealand are going to be hosting, we understand, a tri-series involving England and Australia, we think. I don't
think it's been confirmed, but that's what's being planned.
And then we'll be seeing New Zealand again in the summer. So it should be an exciting summer, I think, Raf.
Yeah, hopefully.
Looking forward to that one.
Definitely. Fingers crossed that Susie Bates is back fighting fit, because we know that she's going to be out for a few months now with the injury she sustained in the WBBL.
Yeah, we're expecting her to miss the February series, certainly, aren't we? And they're not being massively optimistic about that, are they? They're saying that she might be back for the summer, she might not be, but she's really targeting the World Cup in 2022.
Yeah, so. I mean, they've said she'll definitely be out a minimum of 6 months. So it's quite possible we will see her in England next summer, and I really hope we do.
Absolutely.
And So yeah, there's that. It'll be great to see South Africa, who obviously have had some recent beef with England, who England lost to them famously in that T20 World Cup group stages match that ultimately put paid to England's hopes of progressing to the final of the tournament in the end. So I'm sure there'll be a bit of a vendetta going on there. So that'll be really interesting. And I guess the other exciting thing, I think, is that the ECB are making plans for there to be proper crowds at those games. The ECB obviously think, and have been talking to the government, and think that it's very likely that things will be back to normal, or back to almost normal by then, which is great. Obviously, we've heard some really exciting things about vaccines over the last couple of weeks. I don't think that the ECB would be making plans, and they are actually selling advance tickets for the men's internationals next summer. They wouldn't be doing that if they didn't have a reasonable assurance from the government that things would look very near to normal by summer 2021, which is great for cricket and great, generally, to think that we might actually be out the other side of this horrible pandemic by then.
Hopefully our government doesn't stuff it up. A little bit of politics there.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Okay, well, thank you very much for watching. We're looking forward to watching these WBBL semi-finals and finals this week. Don't forget to tune into them on BT Sport. Raf, any predictions?
Yeah, well, first up it's going to be Stars v the Scorchers. Now, obviously, my heart is very much with the Scorchers. However, I do think that Stars are on a roll this season, and unfortunately, I think it's going to be the Stars progressing to the final at the expense of the Scorchers. I hope I'm wrong. And then in Heat v the Thunder, I am going to put my money on the Heat, not literally, but I'm going to get behind the Heat for that one. I think that there's a lot of momentum there in the back half of the season as they progress towards what they hope is going to be a three-peat Heat. And so I think they will knock out the Thunder, and then so that puts it as a Stars v Heat final. And I'm going to get behind the Stars for that, because I think they have really performed very consistently this season, and I can't see the Heat getting past them in the final. What do you think, Sid?
I agree with you about the semi-finals, but I think the Heat might just tip it in the final.
Okay.
I really actually quite fancy them going into that final, and that's some big games. Their lesser players have got that big game experience.
Yeah.
Yes, they've lost a couple of big players, but they've come back this season and they've defied expectations. I think they could defy them one more time.
Well, we will see, and next week we can look back and see who was right, if either of us indeed was right in our predictions. So see you in a week's time. Bye for now.
Bye.